Growing up in Bombay, coconuts were everywhere. They were hanging from trees, stirred into curries and folded into desserts, even mixed into drinks on a hot day. Now, if you live that close to the sea, it's not just an ingredient. It's part of the landscape and the pantry. And now it's a permanent fixture in my kitchen. I use it in everything from slow-cooked stews to sweet cold treats like this coconut lychee lime granita. There's no churning, no fancy ice cream machines, no drama, just a blender, a fork, coconut, and a little patience. If you'd like to follow along with this recipe, you can see step-by-step instructions on the ATK app. Today I'm using 3 forms of coconut. First, I've got desiccated shredded coconut. That is just the meat that's been dried, and I'm going to toast this and extract it with some liquids later in the blender to pull out their flavors. The second thing that I'm going to use today is coconut water, which comes from The second type of coconut that I'm using today is coconut water, which comes from young coconuts, and it's water that the granita needs to build that icy texture. The third form of coconut that I'm using is coconut milk. Because this entire granita is served frozen, a lot of those flavors are going to be dampened, which is why in this recipe we're going to add a few extra things, or rather extra amounts of them, to boost those flavors. To unlock the deep, nutty coconut flavor, I'm going to start with a gentle toast. Medium-low heat, that's nice and slow. This isn't about searing, it's a slow build, coaxing out the richness bit by bit. The flakes I'm using come from mature coconuts. The water is drained, the meat scraped and shredded, and then dried low and slow at about 150 degrees. I prefer unsweetened, that way I control the sweetness. Toasting changes everything. It's all about slow, gentle heat. The natural sugars present inside the coconut, they start to caramelize, and the fats undergo oxidation. The proteins team up with sugars in the Maillard reaction, and what that means for us is that golden coconut starts to smell like dessert. I can smell the coconut right now. It's coming to me straight at my face, which is the best thing in a kitchen. You can see it. It's starting to turn golden, and that toasting starts to bring all those aromatic molecules trapped inside the coconut to the surface. This is going to be beautiful. Because the coconut is dry and it has no water in it and it contains a lot of fats, it starts to burn really quickly. So be careful when you're toasting. As soon as it starts to get fragrant and turn golden brown, pull it off the heat. This is done. I can smell that beautiful nutty coconut aroma. I'm going to take it off the heat and add it straight to my blender to start making the granita. Now I'm using canned coconut water. It's that clear, mildly sweet liquid that's inside young coconuts, which are sometimes called tender coconuts. Back in Bombay, I used to drink these year-round, and it's still one of the first things I grab when I go back. Coconut water doesn't bring fat, but it does add a touch of natural sugar. And more importantly, it adds actual water, something we need since dried flakes aren't going to give us any. Granitas need water to freeze properly, and this takes care of that. Coconut milk though, it's a whole different vibe. It's made by blending coconut meat with water and then straining out the solids so you get this creamy, rich and lush liquid, the opposite of coconut water. I'm going to measure out half a cup of coconut milk and add it straight to the blender. The fattened coconut milk adds body, it rounds out the flavor, and gives you a granita that's silky instead of icy. I love pairing coconut with bright floral citrusy notes, and today that comes from lychee and lime. One sweet and perfumey and the others sharp and zippy, and together they hit all the right notes. To me, lychees smell like what a tropical rose should smell like. That's thanks to geraniol and rose oxide, aromatic compounds which are also found in roses and lemongrass. I'm using canned lychees because they're easy to find, and that syrup they come packed in, that's liquid gold. I'm adding sugar because here's the thing, cold mutes sweetness. As the temperature drops, your ability to taste sugar drops too, a lot. So if you want those bright, juicy flavors to come through, you've got to give them a little boost. Sugar makes it pop, essential in any frozen dessert. And now for the limes, I'm going to use my Zwilling Pro paring knife to slice these limes. I love the control paring knives give me for small jobs like this. Then a splash of lime juice for zing, and a pinch of salt to tie it all together. Now I'm going to blend all of this together until all the sugar is completely dissolved, it's silky smooth, and no big chunks of coconut or lychee are left inside. The blender is going to do all the heavy lifting here. It pulverizes the fruit and fat into tiny little particles, breaking everything down into a smooth, almost milky emulsion. It'll be creamy, fragrant, and loaded with tropical flavor. I'm blending this for a minute until I get a smooth, silky texture and all that sugar is completely dissolved. You really want to use a blender here. A food processor won't get you there. An immersion blender will work, but it takes more time and elbow grease. Blending this well does two things. It extracts maximum flavor from the fruit and it helps form a temporary emulsion so that the coconut fat doesn't separate and float to the top while freezing. Because if it does, you'll end up with icy shards of fat instead of a smooth granita. Let's take a look. The liquid's creamy, milky, and super fragrant. You can smell the coconut and lychee right away. This is exactly what I want. I'm using a fine mesh strainer to get rid of all those bits of coconut that didn't get mixed through because that'll leave a nasty gritty texture in the granita, and I want it to be silky smooth in those ice crystals, and I also don't want it to come to the top during freezing. It takes a few minutes to get the liquid completely strained, but you know what? It's worth it for that smooth granita texture. All right, that's it. Now let's talk about the dish. I'm using a 9x13 baking dish from Stobe. Ceramic dishes maintain temperatures well, and this pan has a beautiful porcelain glass finish that resists scratching. Could you use metal? Sure, it freezes faster, but it also warms up faster, which means your granita will melt quicker every time you take it out. Plus, I'll be using a fork to scrape it later, and metal on metal, scratches, screeches, that's not the vibe. And now for the final touch. Fresh lime zest. All those bright citrusy oils, they are packed inside tiny sacs inside the lime's green skin. A quick pass on the grater releases them straight into the granita, adding a hit of aroma, a little texture, and that pop of green that makes everything look and taste fresher. You might be wondering why I didn't toss it into the blender earlier. I could have, but here's the thing. The zest would have gotten strained out with everything else. By adding it now, just before freezing, it'll actually stick around and do its job. The lime zest is added in, and it's time for me to stick this into the freezer. While that's freezing, I want to take a moment to thank our partners at Stobe and Zwilling for supporting this series. If you've never cooked with Stobe before, you're in for a treat. Each piece is hand-finished and built to last. And Zwilling's kitchen tools, they're the ones I reach for every day. It's been about an hour, and I'm going to start scraping the granita with a fork. And you keep doing this every hour or so until it is completely frozen and fluffy. I can see a lot of large chunks of ice crystals that are on the edges, and I'm pulling those in so they break up and the rest of the mixture starts to get around and starts to cool off. I love breaking things, and ice crystals, smashing them with the fork is very therapeutic. So I love this part of the dish. You can smell the lychees, you can smell the toasted coconut and the fresh lime zest in here, which just makes this all the more worth waiting for. This is the second hour of freezing, and as you can see, it's starting to freeze up more. The ice crystals are starting to form, but they're getting thinner and flakier. We're trying to get a nice, thin, flaky ice crystal because that's what a granita is all about. Getting that perfect scoopability comes down to how the granita freezes. When food freezes, ice crystal forms. The slower the freeze, the bigger the crystals. You might not see the difference, but you'll feel it. And to keep that texture light and smooth, you have to go in there and keep those crystals small. That's where the fork and timing come in. All right, I'm going to take this back to the freezer and stick it in for another hour. Now it's the third hour of freezing, and I'm going to scrape it again. This might seem a little tedious, but you know what? It's just a minute of your time, so it's not that big of a deal, and it comes together really quick. Again, I'm just breaking the ice crystals, and you can start to see them turn thin and flaky. If you don't scrape it every hour, you'll end up with a big block of ice. It'll take a lot more effort and elbow grease and energy to just scrunch up all those crystals. All right, so this is good. I'm going to stick it back into the freezer for one more hour, give it another scrape, and it'll be ready to serve. It's been 4 hours since this has been freezing, and I'm going to give it one last final scrape to break those icy, flaky crystals. And just look at it now. The texture is completely transformed. It's pale, fluffy, almost like snow. Delicate flakes that hold together just enough that melt the second they hit your tongue. This is what you want. Light, bright, and totally scoopable. This is everything I want in a summer vacation. Fruity, tropical, the nuttiness of the coconut, the lychees, the lime, and that little rose aroma that comes from the lychees in the sweet frozen bowl. So good. The full recipe is waiting for you on the ATK app. What's your favorite frozen dessert? Let me know in the comments. You can find links to all of the Stove & Swirling products featured in this video in the description below.